Today, we're diving back in to go over one of the biggest mistakes CTV advertisers make, specifically campaigns that are spread way too thin. In part 1, we went over how to fix these mistakes. So today, we're gonna go over the reason why we see these mistakes happening so often. The first thing to know is that way more people are streaming content than watching broadcast or cable. According to LG, who can tap into their device's own viewership data, less than 15% of devices only consume traditional linear media. And our own independent research shows that, on average, streaming reaches 35 to 40% more households across most, if not all, major DMAs in the US. And yet, time and time again, we see advertisers spending a small fraction of what they do on linear on streaming. The main reason this is happening, in my opinion, is due to the linear providers and broadcast stations themselves. Before cord cutting really even took off, broadcast and cable companies saw the writing on the wall. So they invested in streaming advertising companies early on. This was smart because it allowed them to tap into their already existing network of advertisers already advertising on TV. And thus, they became one of the first to market to start selling CTV advertising in mass. However, they had and still have a bit of a conflict. Those traditional broadcast and cable ads are one of the main revenue drivers for these local stations. And since those stations were, and generally still are, reselling or outsourcing the actual streaming placement to those same firms their parent companies partnered with, very little of the streaming revenue goes to the local stations themselves. This is very important to know for two reasons. Number one, it means to remain as profitable as possible, these local stations have a disproportionate incentive to sell as many spots on their own network as possible rather than streaming. Because unfortunately, if they recommended the correct ratio of dollars to viewers between linear and streaming, their bottom lines would be drastically impacted. And that is clearly not in the advertiser's best interest. And number two, since those local stations are often outsourcing the CTV advertising itself to other companies and generally have a parent company to boot, that results in a lot of mouths to feed, and each of those mouths need a slice of that juicy profit. This means they have to charge significantly higher CPMs than companies that place the CTV advertising directly, like us at Aduro.io, for example. So now, any chance of that already way too small budget doing anything at all for that advertiser is additionally hampered by the fact that that advertiser is gonna get way fewer impressions for their dollars than they should be. And this phenomenon isn't solely limited to local broadcast stations. Many companies that offer CTV advertising are actually just outsourcing all the work and placement to third parties, meaning each party along the way has to jack up the rates so they can each get a cut. I am not kidding when I say sometimes it is actually difficult to tell advertisers how bad they're getting ripped off. We've seen them be charged 3 to 4 times market rate, so much so that it's actually hard to believe it sometimes. Now, if you find yourself asking, well, isn't CTV targeted? Shouldn't my provider just narrow the targeting if my budget's too small? Why aren't they doing that? Well, that answer is unfortunately simple. Because it's way easier to serve impressions to a way larger audience rather than having potentially difficult conversations with your clients, formulating and optimizing an efficient campaign, and actually spending the time to do what's right rather than just taking an order for whatever budget the advertiser comes to them with. But you're not gonna let them get away with that anymore, are you? So, in summary, many companies spend far too few dollars on their CTV advertising because some of the first to market companies that sold CTV advertising had misaligned incentives to disproportionately sell ad dollars on their own network, which anchored everybody to budgets that aren't reasonable. Maybe I should have just said that at the beginning, and then this video would have been way shorter. As always, you can visit us at Aduro.io to read our full blog and summary of these videos, or connect directly with a CTV expert and have them perform a campaign audit for you to see if your budget's being spent effectively. And until next time, keep streaming with clarity, friends.